At what point does our right to bear arms cross the line from protection to potential danger? Is the very freedom that allows us to own firearms under threat? Could defending your home land you in prison? And what did the Founding Fathers really mean when they enshrined the Second Amendment into the Constitution? In this episode, we dive deep into the history, the laws, and the modern-day controversies surrounding gun ownership in America. Whether you're a staunch advocate or questioning where limits should be, join me in this episode as we unpack all of this. Hey guys, and welcome back to Voices of Liberty, and I am so excited to be talking about the Second Amendment with y'all today. I appreciate every single one of my listeners. Y'all have been sharing this podcast like crazy, and it truly just means the world to me. For those who don't know, my main goal for this podcast is to teach women to navigate life with liberty, truth, and grace. So for those who share the podcast episode or their favorite podcast episode with just one friend, I will give you a shout out on the website and podcast, but then also send you an exclusive CCW sticker while supplies last. So please share this podcast with some of your friends. Send your proof to voicesoflibertycontact@gmail.com. That way I can just ensure that you are being honest, and then I can go ahead and send you your sticker in the mail. So in this episode, we're going to be breaking down the Second Amendment within the Bill of Rights. While this is a more well-known amendment that most people know, I am excited to cover it. Our Second Amendment right is one of the most important ones, and our Founding Fathers took great care in writing this amendment specifically. However, owning a gun is not the only thing mentioned in this amendment. I want to go ahead and go over the verse of the week in the weekly challenge. The verse of the week this week is, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. In him my heart trusts, and I am helped. My heart exalts, and with my song I give thanks to him." Psalm 28:7. So for this weekly challenge this week, I really want y'all to be more vocal about your political beliefs. I know it can be really, really hard to speak out on topics like abortion or marriage being between a man and a woman, but these are things that I feel like as conservatives and as Christians we should be speaking about. I know for me, I followed the Live Action Instagram page, and they shared images. Like, they shared these pictures of these aborted babies, and it was truly just such a horrible thing. It's going to make me choke up even talking about it, but I almost shared that on my own Instagram, my own Facebook, and I chickened out just because I knew people can be easily triggered by images like that. But at the same time, I think it's important that we open our minds and our hearts to seeing what's actually happening when an abortion is performed. It's not just a fetus. It's not just a clump of cells. It's actually a baby. And these images were just absolutely horrible and gruesome. But someone had the bravery to share this in the Facebook group, Christian Conservative Wives. And I really, really applaud that, because that is not something that most people want to look at. They don't usually seek something like that out. And we usually try to just pretend it doesn't exist because we don't want to look at it. It's horrible. It's gruesome. I understand. But we have to be more vocal about this stuff, because I don't think people truly understand the weight of all of this. Like, I think people who support it really just don't understand. And some of them probably do, but I think most of them really probably don't understand what they're actually advocating for. So this week, I just really encourage you to stand bold and maybe take a leap of faith whether it's sharing something on Facebook or with your friend. It could be having a faith-based conversation with one of your friends, or maybe it's having a political conversation. I just really encourage you to take a stance and really just kind of be a little bit more bold. This is only going to build your confidence. And I just wanted to applaud Chloe in the Christian Conservative Wives group, who had the boldness to share this live action video of these babies, because it is truly just such a horrible thing, but it really does good to open our eyes to these images, because then we can't say we didn't know. I really wish that I had the boldness to share it. I should have, and I may still share it. I just know that some women can be easily triggered by those images, but I think it's important that we all see it and we are aware of what's actually going on. And I really applaud Chloe for standing for truth and having the boldness to share that in the Christian Conservative Wives group. So I just wanted to say thank you, Chloe, for that. And you were just an example to me in that. So I'm just really grateful. Alright, y'all, let me talk about my friends at Conviction Co. Conviction Co. is a family-owned business started by a Midwest stay-at-home mom. Their goal is to provide their customers with high-quality and on-trend apparel and accessories that make it easy to boldly share truth and spark important conversations. I actually own 2 of their hats. They're the trucker hats, and I have one that says One Nation Under God and a Make America Healthy Again hat. They are truly such good quality. I was so impressed when I ordered them and got them in the mail. I actually got them earlier than I was anticipating, and they really catch people's attention. I get so many compliments on these hats. I had my husband trying them on, my dad trying them on, even my grandma bought a hat. That just shows how they really, really speak to people. So go to convictioncode.com and use code officialccw today to get 10% off your order. Again, that's convictioncode.com, code officialccw to get 10% off your order today. Okay, so now that we have talked about that, I kind of want to move away from that and talk about the Bill of Rights. Before we really begin to discuss the Second Amendment, I just kind of want to refresh our memory a little bit on the First Amendment. So I really want y'all to try to memorize this as we work through them, because having this at the forefront of your mind will only help you and benefit you, especially when it comes to debating and talking to others about your political beliefs. The First Amendment is Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Okay, y'all, so we're going to be unpacking the Second Amendment. And the Second Amendment is one that causes a lot of controversy, and many people interpret it differently, depending on if you're a conservative or you're a liberal. There are 2 sides when it comes to the Second Amendment. There are people who support gun control and use the Second Amendment to justify their views, and there are those who support gun ownership and use it to support their views. While the Supreme Court has ruled it is legal for Americans to own firearms according to the Bill of Rights, states can add limits and regulations to these laws, and we're going to discuss some of that in a little bit. The Second Amendment can be broken down into 2 different clauses, but before I want to break this down, I want to read it first. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So when I was studying for this podcast, it was really hard to find different sources for this specifically, because there is a lot of propaganda out there when it comes to the Second Amendment. And I actually watched this video of this guy talking about it, and he kept saying that the Second Amendment is poorly written. It's written terribly, and he would give James Madison a D if he were grading his paper today, essentially. I thought that was weird, number one, because our founding fathers were really, really smart men. And he was basically saying that this amendment doesn't really make any sense. It's really hard to interpret. I think James Madison was pretty clear on what he wanted for America when it came to their Second Amendment right. I can see how some people would come to the conclusion of this amendment being confusing, but I do not come to the same conclusion, and here's why. I want to add a little bit of a background to this in details. The details help us just understand why James Madison wrote this amendment the way that he did. Remember how we discussed the Magna Carta in the last episode? We discussed that it was a document to keep the king in check, essentially. Another document I want to mention is the English Bill of Rights, and that was written in 1689. This document is similar to the Bill of Rights that we have today, but there are key differences in them. Here's a section from the English Bill of Rights, and it deals with their right to also bear arms. It says that the subjects which are Protestant may have arms for their defense, suitable to their conditions and allowed by law. Okay, that's the English Bill of Rights. This was written before the Declaration of Independence, before the Bill of Rights. So this is essentially probably what James Madison was basing it off of, because he already knew that they had certain rights in England. The English Bill of Rights focuses more on the relationship between monarch and parliament and protects the rights of the British citizens. When James Madison drafted the Bill of Rights, his primary goal was to protect the freedoms of the American people against the government. He understood that without clear protections and rights outlined, individual liberties would be at risk of infringement. He knew that the government could gain too much power or control, and he wanted to ensure that people's rights were absolutely protected. The Bill of Rights wasn't just a set of amendments. It was a firm declaration that the government must be limited in its power, ensuring that fundamental rights such as free speech, religious freedom, and the right to bear arms would remain protected for future generations. Remember in the first episode when I said that states already had their own form of the Bill of Rights? Before James Madison wrote the one that we know and hold true today, here are a few examples of the ones that were already written for the states. These also mention the right to bear arms in some shape or form, which I really find this interesting. Before I read this, I want y'all to keep in mind that the Bill of Rights was written September 25th, 1789. The Pennsylvania Declaration of Rights was written in 1776. So this was written before the Bill of Rights that we have today. And it says that every member of society hath a right to be protected in the enjoyment of life, liberty, and property, and therefore is bound to contribute its proportion towards the expense of that protection, and yield his personal service when necessary, or an equivalent thereto. But no part of a man's property can justly be taken from him, or applied to public uses, without his own consent, or that of his legal representatives, nor can any man who is conscientiously scrupulous of bearing arms be justly compelled thereto, if he will pay such equivalent, nor are the people bound by any laws, but such as they have in like manner assented to for their common good. So that's a lot in this Bill of Rights in Pennsylvania. This is like a little section from it. There is a lot in that. But what I want to point out is that it does mention the right to bear arms in this section, which is pretty interesting to me. I want to go to the Massachusetts Bill of Rights, which is a lot shorter. And this was written in 1780. And remember, the Bill of Rights was written in 1789. So I want to read the Massachusetts Bill of Rights. And it says, "The people have a right to keep and to bear arms for the common defense. And as in time of peace, armies are dangerous to liberty. They ought not be maintained without consent of the legislature. And the military power shall always be held in the exact subordination to the civil authority and be governed by it." So this was the Massachusetts Bill of Rights, and this again was written in 1780. But I want to point out that a lot of these Bill of Rights already mentioned the right to bear arms in some shape or form. So with all that said, why do we even need the right to bear arms? I mean, after all, aren't guns essentially bad? During the time of the American Revolution, there were militias that formed to help protect and defend Americans. So I want to go back to the Bill of Rights, Second Amendment, and it says, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state." So this is the first clause in the Second Amendment, and it's talking about a militia. So during the time of the American Revolution, there were militias that were formed, and this was essentially just a way to help protect and defend Americans. I wanted to give a definition of what a militia even is, and this is from the Merriam-Webster site, and it says, "A militia is a part of the organized armed forces of a country liable to call only in an emergency." So there was no standing army at this time during the American Revolution. So these militias were formed to help defend the states and Americans in times of trouble. These militias were essentially the armed forces of the colonial America, and they needed weapons to ensure that they could have a fair fight with the enemy. While the army was formed in 1775, which is the army that we know today, they were only going to war. They did not protect and defend different states after the war. And that is why in the beginning of the Second Amendment it says, "A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state." After the American Revolution, there were states that had armies and some did not. America was still very, very small, and a state would create its own little militia by calling on local men to serve where needed. While we do not need this today, as our country has its own military and police officers, this was something that the Founding Fathers saw as important. The Founders knew the repercussions of having a large military as a country, as the military could be used against their own people. We saw this with England, and they abused their power by using the British military and navy against the colonists, and this is what led to the American Revolution. Founders were worried that if they did not allow states to have their own regulated militias, a federal army would be used to oppress the people. This is what happened with the British Army, and they began to be used to oppress the colonists. And this is exactly what James Madison was trying to prevent from happening again, because he knew that when people would get into power, whether it be in the future or right after the American Revolution, they would have sinful desires, and they would have desires to take over. And I understand that our founding fathers were great men, but they are men and they made mistakes. So James Madison wanted to ensure that there were policies put in place to protect Americans and made sure that they had their rights. So now I want to get into the gun control argument. The gun control argument comes into play when we talk about a well-regulated militia. They believe that it means that it's the right of the people within the militia to bear arms, not Americans. They believe that this amendment doesn't really apply today because they believe that this was strictly only talking about militias. Founding fathers wanted Americans to have the right to own firearms, and I feel like James Madison made that very clear. The founders really wanted to give Americans a way to defend themselves in case the government were to ever gain too much power. The gun control argument typically comes in when we see school shootings. The left typically protests for more gun control and for more action to be taken. The argument is if we do away with firearms, then we will have no more school shootings. However, I see a lot of issues with this argument. You see, the issue is not with the guns, it is with who is behind the gun. Most of these people who commit these school shootings are mentally unstable people. Not all cases have been, and some people are just crazy, but a lot of them are mentally unstable people. The media rarely talks about that. And the issue is mental illness, not guns. I want to read this article, and I will link it in my sources, but it says, in public discourse, mass shootings are often blamed on mental illness. But the research indicates that the role of mental illness in mass shootings is complicated, not clear-cut. Mental health issues were common among those who engage in mass shootings, with psychosis playing a minor role in nearly 1/3 of the cases, but a primary role in 10% of the time. The data indicates, however, that nearly all persons who engage in mass shootings were in a state of crisis in the days or weeks preceding to the shooting. So from this article, we can clearly see that mental health does play a part in this. The mass shooters typically are not in their right minds, and they are mentally ill when they perform a shooting. There are evil people in this world who seek to harm others, and not every case of a mass shooting is mental illness, but the statistics for those that are pretty high. Most people who commit this heinous crime have some sort of trauma or crisis in their life. This article says, in terms of post-trauma, 31% of persons who perpetrated mass shootings were found to have experiences of severe childhood trauma, and over 80% were in crisis. Trauma was a common element of the backgrounds of those committing mass shootings, both in the database and the qualitative studies. Early intervention through school-based services may be a key component of early prevention. Those two articles are from the National Institute of Justice, so you can go and look at those in the show notes if you're interested. In my opinion, this topic is no different than drugs. We say drugs are illegal, you can't do drugs, but people still do drugs. They still access them illegally. So if people want firearms, they're going to get them. If we ban firearms, people who want to harm others will still get access to firearms in some shape or form. Many Americans use firearms for self-defense purposes. Think about this. If teachers and professors were allowed to carry in the classrooms, how much more of a chance do they have at saving lives? Most Americans use their firearms for hunting and self-defense. If someone intends to use a gun for evil purposes, it doesn't matter if guns are illegal or not. They will find access to the firearm from somewhere, just like people do with drugs. Most Americans who own firearms do use them for protection. This is from Pew Research, and it says, about 7 in 10 gun owners, 72%, say protection is a major reason they own a gun. Considerably smaller shares say that a major reason they own a gun is for hunting and for sport shooting, as a part of the gun collection and for their job. So you can go and look at the details of that article, but majority of people say that they use their guns for protection. I know for me, knowing that my husband carries really makes me feel a lot safer, especially when we go out in public. I've had a couple of instances where I was alone and I've had just random men come up to me. And so I typically now will only go places with my husband, and knowing that he has a gun just really makes me feel a lot more safer, because people are crazy and sometimes people don't always have the best intentions. And while 81% of gun owners say that owning a gun makes them feel safer, a narrower majority of non-owners in gun households say the same. So 81% of gun owners say that owning a gun makes them feel safer, and 57% of those who don't own guns but have them in the house feel the same. So like me, I don't own a gun, but my husband does. And I feel safer knowing that he has one. That was also from Pew Research. Okay, y'all, let me tell you about my friends at 7 Weeks Coffee. 7 Weeks Coffee is America's pro-life coffee company on a mission to fund the pro-life movement one cup of coffee at a time. Why are they called 7 Weeks Coffee? Because at 7 weeks, a baby is the size of a little coffee bean, and it's the same time a heartbeat is clearly detected on an ultrasound. That is why they donate 10% of every sale to support pregnancy care centers across the country. They have raised over $800,000 for these centers and have saved thousands of lives. Now, let me tell you about the coffee because I am very picky about what I put into my body. It's mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, and low-acid, and it's organically farmed. It truly checks all the boxes. So go to 7weekscoffee.com and save 15% forever when you subscribe. Plus, exclusively for my listeners, use the code OFFICIALCCW for an extra 10% off your first order. That's a 25% total savings on your first order. Remember, your order will directly help support a network of over 1,000 pro-life organizations across the U.S. So when I hear the leftists use the term a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, using this term, using this clause to justify gun control does not stand. I don't feel like they have much ground to stand on. And I could agree that we do need to find some ways to maybe restrict those with diagnosed mental illnesses from owning firearms. But there does need to be a clearly defined standard, because if not, a judge could just essentially declare someone mentally ill and infringe upon their rights. So that's what I have to say about that specifically. While the topic of owning firearms can be divisive, this does seem to be an issue the majority of us can agree on. According to Pew Research, 88% of Republicans and 89% of Democrats support preventing those with mental illness from purchasing firearms. Again, like I said, there needs to be some sort of standard for that, because a judge could essentially just declare someone mentally ill and then infringe upon their rights. Something else that I want to bring to your attention is socialist countries always remove their citizens' right to defend themselves. They try to do this with any firearms and only give police and military access to them. When this happens, the military can absolutely be used to oppress the people because they have no way to self-defend or rise against the government. We saw this happen in Germany with Hitler. He began to persecute the Jews. There was no way for them to defend themselves. Previously, there were laws passed requiring all the Jews who had firearms to turn in their firearms. If they refused, they would be executed. Their rights were stripped from them overnight, and they could do nothing about it. This is why we cannot have gun control to the extent most Democrats want. This can absolutely lead to policies that would use the military to oppress Americans. So now I want to get into the part where it talks about the right to keep and bear arms. The framers of our nations wanted to ensure that Americans had the right to defend themselves when needed. Just like with the First Amendment and with the Second Amendment, I want to talk about how when people say that this amendment is poorly written or James Madison had no clue what he was doing, I think he knew exactly what he was doing. And the reason I say this is because, like we saw with the First Amendment, there were commas after each thing separating them. And the same is true with the Second Amendment. After the part where it says, a well-regulated militia, necessary to the security of a free state, then we have another comma, and then we have the right of Americans to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So I think he knew exactly what he was doing. There's a comma after each one separating them. This causes so much controversy, as some claim it is poorly written, and others claim the framers were separating the different sections. In the Second Amendment, it clearly states, again, I just read it, I'm going to read it again, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. This is why there's only been regulations when it comes to owning firearms. Okay, guys, we're going to hear from my friends from Back to the Basics 101. Back to the Basics 101 is a small business owned by Johnny and Ginger Butts. They are a farming family who are also believers. Basics, in their name, Back to the Basics 101, is an acronym for Brothers and Sisters in Christ Service. Ginger believes that when we're saved, discipled, and healthy, we can enjoy the abundant life Jesus talks about in John 10:10. Their family has experienced healing from what Ginger calls modern diseases through God's creation. Back to the Basics 101 produces 4 product lines to help consumers get nutrition from the source. Each of their product lines get you as close to the point of nutrition as possible. For instance, their homemade baking mixes are made from the wheat they grow in Middle Georgia. Ginger then takes the wheat to a miller who raises the gate to his pond, which activates the 4-foot stone mill that grinds the wheat berries into flour. She keeps the process primitive to ensure the consumer gets nutrients at their peak. Their other 3 product lines include a plant protein blend, elderberries, and more ultimate syrup kit and seasonings. I just want to say that every time I feel a cold coming on, I use Ginger's elderberry syrup kit, and it is so good. My mom always keeps it in the fridge, and if we ever feel a cold coming on, we will take the elderberry syrup. So good for you. Highly recommend. So go to backtothebasics101.com and use code CCW10 for 10% off your first order. Again, that's backtothebasics101.com, code CCW10 for 10% off your first order. Follow them on Instagram and Facebook to see all their small batch products to help make a healthier you. If the Supreme Court were to put a full ban on all firearms completely, they would absolutely be infringing on the Second Amendment rights of Americans, because it clearly says in the Second Amendment that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, this is the same with freedom of speech. There are regulations. You cannot own whatever gun you want in America. The government can say what you own. For example, citizens cannot own automatic weapons like a machine gun. A machine gun is typically used in the military, but is not allowed in the general public. These are some of the regulations put in place by the federal government. This is just to ensure the safety of Americans. It took the Supreme Court a while to actually see any court cases regarding the Second Amendment. Some Americans took this way too far in the case of United States v. Cruikshank. This happened right after the time of the Civil War. This case was brought to court in 1865. Cruikshank was a part of a Democratic militia, and they attacked a group of Republican black men. These men who were attacked were freed slaves. Cruikshank and his militia of men murdered 150 men that day. The case was brought to the Supreme Court, and Cruikshank was found to be in violation of the 1870 Enforcement Act. The Enforcement Act, if you're not aware, is basically just an act that prevented groups like the KKK from meeting together to terrorize and harm other Americans. They found that Cruikshank was in violation of the First Amendment and Second Amendment and the 14th Amendment, along with the Enforcement Act. Cruikshank stripped the rights of these men to have the freedom of speech, to peaceably assemble, and the right to bear arms, and even the right to vote. If you're not aware of the 14th Amendment, it was added to the Constitution in 1866, and it states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and are subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law, nor deny any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. This amendment was passed after the Civil War, and it was just giving rights to those who were previously enslaved. Another court case I want to talk about is Heller v. District of Columbia. This Supreme Court case is actually pretty recent, and I'm going to read the facts of the case from oyeasy.com, and it says, provisions of the District of Columbia Code made it illegal to carry an unregistered firearm and prohibited the registration of handguns, though the chief of police could issue 1-year licenses for handguns. So if you're a police officer, you could have a license to carry a firearm. The code also contained provisions that required owners of lawfully registered firearms to keep them unloaded and dismantled or bound by a trigger lock or some other similar device unless the firearms were located in a place of business or being used for legal recreational activities. Dick Anthony Heller was a D.C. Special Police Officer who was authorized to carry a handgun while on duty. He applied for a 1-year license for a handgun. He wished to keep it home, but his application was denied. Heller sued the District of Columbia. He sought an injunction against the enforcement of the relevant parts of the code that argued that they violated the Second Amendment right to keep a functional firearm in his home without a license. The district court dismissed the complaint. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit reversed and held that the Second Amendment protects the right to keep and bear arms in the home for the purpose of self-defense, and the District of Columbia's requirement of that firearm kept in the home to be non-functional and violated that right. So essentially, you could own a firearm if you got approved, but you had to have your gun dismantled. What good is it going to do if you have to take your gun apart every time you bring it home? If someone breaks into your home, you have to be like, hold up a second. Let me put my gun back together before I defend my home. No. This is clearly a law that was infringing on the rights of Americans in D.C., And thankfully, Heller had the guts to bring this to everyone's attention. So the question is, do the provisions of the District of Columbia Code that restrict the licensing of handguns and require licensed firearms to be kept in the home to be non-functional violate the Second Amendment? So does this violate the Second Amendment? Do you think that it violates the Second Amendment? Here is how they ruled. The Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 majority that the ban on registering handguns and the requirement to keep the guns in a home disassembled or non-functional with a trigger lock mechanism violate the Second Amendment. So the court did rule in Heller's favor, and essentially Heller's Second Amendment rights were being violated. While this case is more recent, there is a lot we can take from it. It just goes to show how a lot of the gun control laws and restrictions are not very wise. When I read the Second Amendment, I do not feel that it is poorly written. I think that James Madison knew exactly what he was doing to protect Americans' right to self-government and defense. Remember, their firearms at the time were called muskets, but James Madison knew that firearms and weapons would evolve over time, which is probably why he used such a generic term when he said the right of the people to but keep and bear arms. Now, when it comes to firearms and self-defense weapons, I agree that we need to be careful. I think the person who purchases the firearms needs to know how it operates. Gun safety is huge, and I think it's important that those who own them know how to use them. The left wants you to believe that it is bad to own firearms and that we need gun control. This is simply not true. And according to statistics, those who perform mass shootings have some sort of mental illness, trauma, or crisis that has led them to perform this crime. Owning a firearm can protect your life and other people's lives in the process. In Georgia, my home state, we do not have as many laws and regulations when it comes to owning firearms as other states. However, there are local classes offered to those interested that teach you gun safety and just different things like that. Georgia has many public gun ranges available also, and I think if you own a gun, you need to know how to shoot a gun. I think if you own a firearm, knowing gun safety is a really, really big deal. So I would encourage you, if you have a firearm, take some classes, really just learn about it. Here are a few cardinal rules of gun safety. Number 1 is to treat every firearm as if it's loaded. And number 2, never point a firearm at anything you do not intend to shoot. Number 3, keep your finger off the trigger until your sights are on the target. Number 4, be sure of your target and what is behind it and beyond it. Georgia is a concealed carry state, meaning that you can carry your firearm on your person and conceal it. This is also great in my opinion because if you are out and about in public and someone wants to rob or harm you, they will not know that you have the weapon on your person. You can defend yourself if needed. You will need to look at your state's guns, laws, and regulations, but I think it's really important for women to own handguns as well, even if it is just a small one. These handguns could really honestly just save your life. As women, we go to a lot of places alone, and it makes us easy targets. And I'm not saying that to dog or hate on women. I'm just saying that when women are alone, we are easy targets at times. A lot of us run in our free times. I have many friends that run, and they run alone. And I think that having a firearm on you is essential. I think that all women who run should be carrying a firearm in some shape or form. Many men find women as easy targets, and sometimes I wonder if in cases where these women who were running alone and were attacked, if they had a small handgun in their pocket, what would have happened? It could have honestly possibly saved their lives. This is one of the most important amendments for us to consider and to protect. The left is trying everything in its power to strip us of our Second Amendment rights. While I know in their hearts they believe they are doing the right thing, it is important that Americans have the right to self-defend. This is why it's important for us to be well-versed in what's going on around us. We need to understand and know what policies the local government and the federal government are trying to put into place. Even though we have the Second Amendment, when it comes to gun laws and regulations, that is left up to the states. Voting in local elections is essential, and this is why we cannot just turn a blind eye to these discussions. The policies put into place in our local government can affect how we live our everyday lives. We have to care, because if we have the attitude of, oh, it just doesn't matter, politics is politics, I don't care, then we are really turning a blind eye to so much that is going on. In a way, that is a very selfish attitude in my opinion, because these policies affect so many people, and it affects the people who do care. I say this because local elections are very important. And typically, I want to say that Democrats turn out more for local elections than Republicans do. And this is a big problem. We have to turn up for these elections. We have to show up, because if not, there are going to be policies put in place locally that harm our rights as Americans. So if you are a Republican, you need to be involved in looking at your local elections. It's very, very important. So hopefully by now you have a better understanding of the Second Amendment and a appreciation for it. Again, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has been sharing the podcast. It has been such a huge, huge blessing. I'm so grateful for every single one of you. And I'm just so thankful. Y'all have been sharing this podcast, and if you share with just one friend, again, you will get an exclusive CCW sticker in the mail while supplies last. And just send your proof to voicesoflibertycontact@gmail.com. I also encourage you to join our Facebook group if you're not in our Facebook group. It is called Christian Conservative Wives, and we have one for Christian Conservative Women. And we have lots of great discussions in there as well. So I highly encourage you to go and join that if you're not a part of it, and just be a part of our community. We would love to have you.